How do you make comics without all the frustration, without feeling lousy and inadequate all the time? Join me, Jess Rolifson,
And me, Tom Hart,
on the Terrible Anvil. Each week, we build community and shift our mindset about what it means to make comics and art. We're working through the whole process, one piece at a time, turning our suffering and angst into fun and glee. Join us at sawcomics.org. I can't believe it. Oh, what a thrill. What
Oh, wait.
episode is this? Where are we? What day is it? It's the Terrible Anvil, episode 15, if my math serves me right. I'm here with my stupendous co-host.
Tom Hart.
And my name is Jess Rolifson, and we're at the Sequential Artist Workshop in the internet, in your ears, in your brain, in your dreams. And this week we're talking about collaborating. And that can mean a lot of different things, and there's lots of different ways to do it. And it seems like, generally speaking, there's an opportunity for a lot of fun. And I know a lot of us are trying to maximize our fun and minimize our pain. The fun to pain ratio is in our favor today, I think.
Um, I wanted to ask you before we dig in, how is your book coming out? Because we're winding down the Terrible Anvil, right? We have 6 more episodes maybe, and the point of this podcast was to help you flesh out some places where you were still looking for solidity or some clarity. And so we've been collaborating. Ooh, keyword. Watch the Pee Wee thing come down and go. So we've been collaborating on sort of idea generation and stuff like that about that. And so I just wanted to check in. How's that going?
It's going really great because you're my collaborator. If I were doing it alone, I wouldn't nearly be where I'm at just in terms of the work that's been done, but also I think the whole idea was a collaboration in that I had started making posts in the graphic novel intensive, these enthusiastic, unhinged, as the kids might say, really brief posts in the graphic novel intensive. They're like, you can do it. Here are 5 easy ways to just like totally throwing spaghetti at the wall, but usually arranged around a topic with a lot of animated gifs or gifs, depending on what hill you want to die on, of like Axl Rose or Chaplin or something like that. But just trying to make stuff as relatable and silly as possible, because I think a lot of for maybe it's just what we fall into or what the systems have already been established are, but a lot of the structure of teaching feels a little gatekeepy in that like there's a way with a capital W of how to do stuff, particularly with comics, have seemed like mystifying, and there is an old school tradition, let's say in America since the 1940s, of like Bristol board cartooning, like make sure your table is at an angle. And those are all really good things. But I think like the heritage of that is like, oh, I need to go to a real place and learn how to really do it. And not that Saw's not a real place, but we are like broadcasting from the void. So I don't know what you define as reality, but like yeah, it was just like, how can we make this? I think it was like maybe a book to myself also. But anyway, Tom collaborated, and then he was like, oh, all this is really good stuff. It should be a book. And I was like, oh, that's a really cool idea. And then he was like, no, you have a deadline and you have to do it. And I was like, oh. And
Oh, oh,
and
oh.
we yeah, then we check in. So that's also helpful too, because like I can be honest about, oh man, it's not going really well. Or I'll have some stuff and kind of just having an editor, but also someone to kind of peer review the work. It's nice that we're both like relatively fluent. I would say Tom's more fluent than I am in comics, so that's what the topic of the book is. So his edits are really close to understanding what it is I'm trying to do, and that's not always a given with the editors you work with, because they might not be
Hmm.
attuned to comics. They might be more of journalists or web designers or developers or literary writers. So there's like lots of different types of creators, and there's things that like inherent knowledge that about comics. Sorry, I'm really rambling, but there's stuff that cartoonists know. There was a question earlier before we got on the call on the network. Anita asked like what like how much power sort of, I'm paraphrasing, but like how much power does a cartoonist have in a collaborative relationship that's professional where you're getting edits from an editor or a publisher. And it made me think that I think sometimes we don't realize how much power we actually do have when we're making stuff. And that if you're in the room with somebody and they're taking the time to have a conversation about collaboration, chances are they see you as someone who knows what they're talking about. And so like I feel like the battle is kind of half won. So I just wanted to like flag that early as like something we could maybe talk about. Anyway, in answer to your question, Tom, it's going pretty good, but it's all due to my intrepid collaborator, aka you.
Well, I just want to make sure that people know if they're listening in the past. Wait, can you listen in the past? Anyway, if you're listening in the future, the book might be out now. So go look for it.
Oh, wherever fine books are sold, it's on the top of the New York Times bestselling how to make comics genre.
All right. So we're going to talk about collaborating. And actually, that seems like such a broad topic. So I'm going to let you obviously lead it since you've got a lot of thoughts on it, but also ways in which you want it to work with the rest of your book. But I love collaborating and I really am excited to talk about it. So where do you want to start?
Yeah. And kind of, yeah, I think where I want to start is like the bridge of like where what SAW is for, like we're comic school and we're online. I guess that's like the short version. And that can be collaborative in that you meet other students and you share in the joy and the thrill and the pain of like maybe submitting for an anthology at the end of the year-long program, let's say. But I think the best classrooms can feel collaborative. Like the students that are maybe like have a certain level of confidence or like just maybe a little less doubt. I wouldn't say they know everything, but they're kind of on a roll. Then they'll make stuff and then they'll bring it to the teacher and be like, what do you think about this? And in the best circumstance, I think that's a collaboration that the instructor might become a bit of an art editor or art director or something like that. And it's the same thing with the students if you have like a small group of people. And art school is famous for like terrible critiques where you put your stuff on the wall and everyone's like it's garbage and we're all like healing from that stuff but I think it happens regularly in a classroom where people are like excited about the work they're making. They're like, does this look okay? um and or like, how do I get this to read right? And I feel like that's a different experience than the work I do um like I guess like freelance stuff that like the I might be I'm definitely not the smartest person in the room, but I'm the person that might be thinking about comics the most. So like I'm thinking about flow and legibility and like does this character are they're always making sense where they are and can you read where we are and what time of day it is and like little things like that that I don't think the editors, not because they're not smart or anything, they're thinking about other things. They're like I don't even know. I don't even plan or pretend to know what they're thinking about. But they're like, I think because we're looking at different things, but they're all in service of like the quality of the work or the legibility of the work, we all arrive at the same place, like high five. But not all collaborations are the same. There's lots of different ones. So we have the classroom one. Tom and I collaborated. Well, before we collaborated on the Bootlegger's Guide to Comics, we worked on the Odyssey of Sergeant Jack Brennan. Tom was like a you wore all kinds of hats. That's the other thing with collaborators; they often wear multiple hats. So you were like a consultant, a comics consultant, but also like the editor of the piece too, right? How would you? What was your?
I think I was a co-editor with Joey
Yeah,
Manley. Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, it was more of yeah, it was an editor in the traditional mainstream sense, and that I was coordinating a lot of people's roles, and also making sure that the things that didn't get done that I sort of did, or or figured out how to get them done. Yeah.
That's how I figured out. Well, I didn't really figure it out. Tom was like, "You should use this thing called calligrapher to make your font," and I was like, "What?" And he's like, "It's easy." And then he like sent me back the file in like 20 minutes, and I was like, "Wow, this is so cool." So now I get to use it. So. And then yeah, that was multiple artists. I forget how many artists were on that, like at least 10, right?
No, about 5 or 6.
Oh, it seemed like a lot. Uh
Yeah.
okay, quality over quantity. Yeah, so that was an instance where we're collaborating and that I just did what Tom asked me to do, which I guess isn't that different. But we had a pre-existing script that had been written by a writer and there were consultants with the military because it was based a story based on military populations. And then yeah, just like it got read through, got approved, they got grant money, and they're like, let's go. We need some artists, and here's everybody's section, and then you got to draw it. And then you turn the stuff in and you got edits. One of the other questions we got before the call was like, when do you get edits from an editor? And how bad is it? And I think generally I've been lucky that all the editors that I've had have tried to stay out of the way, but also stay in touch. Like there's definitely regular check-ins after each step and then quantifiable goals. Like, hey, let's have this script and let's check out and see if there's any snags. Okay, that looks good. You want to draw some preliminary stuff? Okay. Oh, what about this? You know, it's each step of the way you have a little bit of a check-in so that when you do get to the final art, there's not this big surprise that like, oh, that character is actually like right-handed instead of left-handed. I don't know if anyone would really care about that, but yeah, so it's like I really can't think of an example where someone was like telling me stuff that I didn't want to do or didn't I was fully not on board with. And I've broadly speaking been treated with a lot of respect with any of the people I've been lucky to collaborate with.
Was it you I was talking to this week about when writers and journalists get cracking and they need something illustrated and they spend weeks and weeks hashing out the writing of it and then they finally approve it and then they hand it to you and they say, "Can you get it to us day after tomorrow?"
Yes, I that might have been you could have been it could have been someone else, but I remember like flippantly like whining about, oh my gosh, you were like, oh wow, you did that freelance piece recently really fast, and I was like, oh, I was like, they had that script for months, and then I
Yeah.
got art done in like 3 weeks, and I was like just totally freaking out. So that kind of brings me to another idea is like, so we have power, but you also you can like clearly set boundaries at the very beginning. I recommend before you even get started. It's kind of like going on a first date or something. You're like, what's the budget? What's the deadline? Can you live with those things? And be realistic. If you feel like it's a little bit of a low number for the amount of work involved, you can always ask for more. The worst thing they're going to say is like, ah, that's the budget we have. Maybe we could trim the scope of it to make it, more worth your time. So I've definitely had conversations like that, but that's always weird and awkward, but survivable. And then deadlines are really useful and important. And then I think generally with comics, not everybody works in those like blocks of time where you figure out the whole script and you figure out every single detail of the thumbnails, but at least attempting to it, like, okay, I'll have a draft. Doesn't mean that none of it can change or that you're chained to a desk and you have to do it exactly as you said you would, but um it's basically a promise. Like I think this is close, at least 80% of what you think might happen to best of your knowledge. So a lot of it's just based on trust and transparency, and like just trying to visualize this thing that doesn't exist yet together with another person, that and you have to kind of have faith in the other party too.
That brings me to something I think in all of these examples, and there are more types of examples we can talk about, but in all these examples, you start with a shared goal, right? You
Yeah.
say, what is our shared goal and how do we get there? So the classroom is collaboration. The shared goal is like this generative environment that's going to play to everybody's strengths and help them. Um, Everybody's going to have individual goals inside of that, right? And it might be a mainstream kind of course, or it might be, more like personal kind of comics or something, but we've all got a shared goal. And likewise, um, within any of the editor, illustrator, that kind of collaboration, there's a shared goal. It's like we have to have a 4-page comic that reads for people who read the Washington Post pretty clearly by next Friday. How do we get there? And with the Odyssey of Sergeant Jack Brennan that we all worked on, that was largely brought to life by Brian Derries, who had a vision for it, but also, and that vision was to help returning veterans primarily. And so he had a whole story about it. And so we were serving that vision. So in most cases, I think I just want to address that idea of that, like, if we always keep that in mind, like what are we serving in this collaboration, right? What is the vision or what is the shared goal? Then collaborating can be fun and it can be just a normal team effort of which humans are usually capable.
We're sort of famous for it.
Well, I don't know. I'm really pessimistic.
For good and
What do you
bad,
think?
right?
Yeah,
Some collaborations.
right.
Uh,
Um, But there are other kinds too. I mean, have you done any fun? I mean, collaborations just for fun, for instance,
I
and
don't
not.
have fun, John. Oh, well, you were posting a lot in our flow and published area of the Mighty Network on Saw's like sort of private, semi-private social media space about jam comics. I have done that before, and I try to do it once a semester with the in-person classes I teach, and people are like, I'm always delighted by it, but I think people really surprise each other. It's like the quiet person comes up with like the most amazing, like really like kind of dark humored panel, like really sharp, incisive dialogue, and like someone that you think is like it just like it never comes out how you might imagine. And I did warn my students, I was like, when I when I did more of these jam comics in my 20s, I feel like by panel three, there's just like full frontal nudity. So I'm like, let's keep it PG-13 to make it as accessible as possible. But it depends on who you're collaborating with. But yeah, I feel like if you're doing exquisite corpse drawings at the bar with a bunch of bros, you're gonna have a cool experience. And then also like, yeah, being in like a maybe more formal buttoned up space where people are trying to be more not more equitable, but like a little more chill, less rowdy.
Well, again, it's shared goals, right? And a lot
Yeah.
of times, and I think, I'm old enough so that I starting to realize that like, oh, the younger people have figured this out, and I'm going to talk about it, and everybody's like, yeah, we know. But
Like,
anyway,
okay, Dad.
yeah, right. I'm going to talk about it anyway, which is that I think collaborations and jams, particularly for a long time, were chances for, yeah, bros, largely guys, largely, but not always, but people to sort of outdo each other, right? And so they'd be
Oh
like,
yeah.
they'd have a drink in hand, and they'd be like, yeah, all right, and and they just pass it along, and they're just like, how can they like outgross each other out, outkill each other's characters, outdo each other, just be more badass. I don't know,
Oh,
just
it's so, and then like it escalates so quickly, and there's like
right.
all these plot twists. And like if you were by yourself, you would never have the nerve to do such things. And yet it like completely holds together, and it's like
No, I disagree.
no, some
Well,
of them land in the right place. I wouldn't say always. Right, yeah, like untethered enthusiasm can't have its own pitfalls.
well, that's sort of where I'm going. And if you have examples that did hold together, I'd love to hear them. But I think at least my jamming experience in those early days and of reading certain jams, if it wasn't to outdo each other, it certainly was like all those plot twists and things like that you mentioned to me didn't hold together. And that's why I wanted to get to that idea of a shared goal, which is that um, there's so much we can learn from actual collaboration in other media, whether it's improvisational music. I turned to improvisational theater and comedy, which when I started taking courses in it, I realized like, oh, this is what collaborating is, because there's the shared goal. Honestly, the shared goal of a lot of improv comedy is like making the other person look good, making the other person like have a place where they can really thrive. And like and when that happens, the story can thrive too. And so I'm going to throw out an example, going to make some people mad, I'm sure. Um, when I remember maybe late 80s, I think, uh, there was word on the street that Art Spiegelman was spearheading a jam comic. And I was like, Spiegelman is brilliant. This is great. I'm so glad that there's going to be, some sort of jam comic to show what the media is capable of and stuff like that. And it came out, and I thought it was the worst book I'd ever read. It was called Narrative Corpse, right? Uh-oh, just lost Jess. I guess I have to ramble on my own. Oh my gosh. Anyway, I can do that. If you're all listening, and if somebody sees Jess, just tell me in the chat. So, all right, maybe she left because she didn't want to hear me badmouth Narrative Corpse. But the Narrative Corpse came out, and it's this giant, oversized book, and it's got tons of really high level people in it. From from the person who created Beetle Bailey on the sort of like mainstream popular comics end to I think it might even had Robert Crumb in it or something like that. Um, and the premise of it was like they would do each artist would do three panels, and then they would send that three panels to the next artist. All the new artists would see is the previous three panels. And so to me, it just it was unreadable because there was no continuity. The only thing that somebody saw was the previous three panels. Um, and so um, and so it just wasn't It wasn't fun. It didn't hold together. Too many plot twists, etc. Exactly what Jess was talking about. So I'll have to catch her up when she returns. Um, the point being is that I felt like there was a lack of structure up front. Like had there been some sort of like series of arrangements to be like, this is our shared goal. We're creating here's the kind of thing we want to create, and here's how we are going to hopefully create it. And within those boundaries, let's have a lot of fun. And I just didn't feel like that was set up that way. And it's okay. I mean, they did the project they wanted to do. And that's fine. So I'll keep rambling again. So in my pretentiousness as a young teacher. Oh wait, Jess is calling me. Should I take this call on speakerphone, guys? Hang on. Yes, Jess, you're on speakerphone.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. You
The
want
call is
to?
this is so funny. We're collaborating, and a third collaborator, the universe, has decided to participate.
Are you not on Zoom anymore?
No, I don't think so. My Wi-Fi at the library, the power went out at the library.
Oh, how funny. Hey, Meg, can you in the chat tell us if you're hearing Jess well enough to keep this going? Um, oh,
We
great.
might have to finish it.
All right, we're just going to keep going, Jess. I'm just going to be talking to my phone. So
Okay.
I was going on about narrative corpse, which I was really disappointed in. And it's too late to rehash that. You'll have to listen to the archive. But uh but anyway, so in as sort of a young teacher, I wasn't that young, but whatever. I set out all these rules I of like how it might be possible to collaborate, in which I had ways in which I hadn't seen cartoonists collaborate before. There's always the writer artist collaboration that's pretty well established. There's also the sort of Dupuis Barbarian. There's two French artists. Actually, I think they might be Canadian, um, who collaborate. And they sort of like pass things off to each other, and they sort of have a blended style, kind of like the Coen brothers, I think. You're not really sure who's doing what. But so I came up with all these games, and I named them. Like, I said I there was like some for two creators, some for 4 or 5 creators. One was inspired by improv comedy, the form called the Herald, which is a very, very, very popular improv comedy form. It usually winds up with a 20-minute piece that is roughly 6 to 9 scenes, and it's really marvelous. When it's done well, it's just the best thing ever. So I created this jam um, idea with some very strict outlines, and I was like, creators should do this. Let's try it. It's 7 scenes. Here's how the scenes would work, blah blah blah. And I wrote it in my book, but I never really tested it out. And so then when I tested it out, it took about 8 hours to do. I thought it was like a 30-minute thing. Anyway, it didn't. But so again, it's different than the types of collaborations you were talking about, which are editor artists, and this was more like, let's have fun together, let's have a shared space and a shared idea, and have fun within those rules.
Yeah. I keep thinking about like other tangential stuff, like in addition to having the same goal, like goal seems a little easier to quantify, but like something a little more abstract, like vision or something like that, might be harder to drive the car towards at the same speed with another person, if that makes sense. But it got me thinking about collaborating with my partner, who is the writer on the comics I've been doing lately about the hospital. And that has, I mean, the subject matter is heavy, but that has been so much fun to like think about the language and be in the room most of the time with a collaborator. It's not like we talk about the work all the time, but it's so much nicer. Like when I was working on the graphic novel, I interviewed veterans, and that was a type of collaboration. But then I was like left to my own devices with these recordings and transcripts, trying to figure out where the story was. And with working with a writer, he's working really hard to get an actual comic script together. And I can kind of berate him like, oh, that's too many words. But then we're both like, oh, that's a really pretty part. Maybe we could keep that in. I could draw something else. So we're getting better at it, but it's just really nice if I have a technical question, I can just ask him. And then sometimes if he doesn't have explicit faith in the idea, I don't know if it's helpful, but I'm like, oh my gosh, no, this is awesome. You have to write that. And then by the time I get the script, I start panicking about my ability to draw. And I was just complaining. We just submitted the layout sketches to the Boston Globe for the piece he just wrote. And I was like, I hope I do a really good job drawing this one because we've done a couple, and I always want to have a little more time to refine my art. Anybody else? And then they never do. And so I was like, oh, I just gotta use what worked last time. And anyway, I was like, I really hope it looks good. And he's like, oh, well, those are just sketches. That's okay. You know, he was like, not dismissive, but like it's still early, you know, like so it's almost like I've never played sports, but I feel like it might be like that, like having a teammate or being in the same band and like not being in Fleetwood Mac, like.
Well, what you just described is like an ongoing project, and it actually relates to our style episode because I heard you actually say, oh shucks, I already forgot. Um, oh, I'll just go with what worked last time, which is how one way we
Yeah,
described style last time. And so, if you're collaborating over a period of time with a partner, or you have this chance, right, to get into a style of working together and a unique style of output, which is really great, right?
yeah, yeah, I think so. And then I mean, I'm married to my collaborator, and like I want to impress him. So like I think it keeps my quality maybe a little bit better. And also like he's lurking when we're not collaborating. Like he saw the stuff that was in progress for the Washington Post a couple weeks ago, and he's like, oh, that's really cool, or like, ah, it's not that bad. You know, like he can kind of help me be the litmus test that's like, no, that's good, or like, yeah, keep working. The way your songwriting editor collaborated with you. Like,
I
I think
like,
I'm getting back on the Zoom call.
oh, yeah, I see Jess joined as a guest. Let me, if, oh, um, let's see if Jess is there. Um, well, all right, gang. Sounds like, are you the back, Jess?
I'm here. Hopefully the audio is a little bit better. Wow, what a ride.
Okay, I'll turn off my phone, I suppose. Hang on a second. So, boy, it's like we're in the middle of a tornado or hurricane or something.
It's so funny. It's like, pardon me, I have to take this call. Oh, it's you. Let's keep talking.
So I I want to address the issue of control.
LOL.
Like, right? Because if you're gonna collaborate, you're gonna lose control, right? And how much is that an issue? I've read interviews with certain kinds of cartoonists where um and this is not to denigrate this idea, but where they say the drawing board is where I get to be in total control, right? And that's awesome if you feel comfortable with your creative powers. But if you don't, like me, I'm like, I don't want to be in control. So how much of like ceding control and how much of like letting yourself be a part of a process you don't even understand yet is valuable, or how much do you want to be like the sole author when you sit down at your desk to a project? And maybe one person might wish for both, it's very possible. Um,
That's a really good question for my therapist. I'm writing it down. Uh,
okay,
yeah,
well,
like not to a lot of unpacking about control. Are you a top or bottom when you collaborate? Well, I'm thinking about like, well, I am on team. I don't, I like, I'm tend to relinquish control as quickly as possible, but I think that's a defense mechanism, so I don't have to be as
uh,
accountable. I'm like, I just was doing what they told me. I would totally, not to get too dark, but I feel like if there was some like clever game where it's revealed at the end that you're some type of like collaborator with an evil force, like I would totally accidentally do that because I'm like, well, I was just following orders. Anyway, I read this crazy book called Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin, and there's like a video game she designs that's like that in the book. It's a novel. Anyway, control. Um, I think a lot of my, again, like not wanting to be in control and maybe give some of my power away even to a deficit is related to being a little insecure about what I'm making. That the more confident I get or just regular I get in my practice, the more control becomes a little less important. Maybe it's just getting older too. I pick less fights with editors. I remember being like in my 20s and doing stuff early on with the nib and like arguing over every single line edit and probably annoying the hell out of Larry Harris. And she was really patient with me, and I didn't deserve her. But anyway, I think editors put up with a lot of nonsense and a lot of ego for sure. But the older I get, I think there's something about I can't find a good word for it, but maybe like feeling a little more self-possessed, like not exactly like confident, but maybe it is confidence, but I just have a baseline of what my knowledge is, and I'm like, oh, that's useful. It doesn't mean that I know everything, but what I do know is actually useful and helpful in this context, working with other collaborators that might not know those things. And that gives me the confidence to speak out and be like, oh, well, what if we did it this way? And here are my reasons in thinking that. I think this would flow really well, or maybe this looks like too many words. Is there an opportunity to like break this up a little bit? Um, and I don't know if that it's not, I don't think that just comes straight from collaborating on freelance stuff, but I think anytime you start talking with other people about your art, either in a classroom or like teaching or being a student, any kind of classroom setting, um, you at least with art, I feel like there's more of like an open door to ideas where there is accountability and you kind of want to do what you say you're going to do, but there's also in the best scenario, like what if it could be like this? Oh, what about this? What about this? So instead of like the one up thing in the jam comics, it's like of course we have limits like deadlines and budgets, but at the beginning of an idea, when you tell someone like this is the idea, this is my pitch, and everyone gets really excited, including the editors, you get excited, and that's like everyone's really high. They're like, oh my God, this is gonna be so good. And it wasn't the last meeting we had with the Boston Globe, but maybe the meeting prior to the last piece we did. One of the editors couldn't make the actual time we were in the office doodling on the dry erase board. And he showed up at the very end, and we were all like, like super excited. Our eyes were really big. And he's like, how's it going? We're like, it's going to be awesome. And we were just like all talking at once. And he was like, okay, very cool. I mean, you could tell like we just like got so excited. So it is cool if you can have a moment like that where you're talking about something that doesn't exist, but you're forced to make the thing to bring it into like existence or bearing, like because you said it in public that you were going to do it. But you have people around that are like, hey, how's it going? And we have this date that you said you're going to get to me by, so like deliver something, and then it gets closer to the finish line, but also closer to the vision or goal or whatever. But yeah, I think the only thing, I don't know if I want control. Well, it's hard. I mean, it would be, I am interested in at one point like maybe making my own writing or fiction or something like that and making a comic that's separate from as many collaborators. So I think the idea of control, I sort of feel like I signed up to not have quite all the control if I want to get my work published, and then also if I want someone else to write it. I'm like, well, if you're outsourcing some of the help, you can't. I mean, unless you're like Oprah or Ellen DeGeneres or something, like you're not going to be able to boss everybody around, and you don't want a reputation for being a jerk either. So, um, I don't
I want to I want to go back to that scenario you're describing of the group enthusiasm, right? And the rallying around a project and sort of like coming up with these ideas and making them manifest. Um, that is both wonderful and scary. And the reason I say it's scary is I feel like art is this like safe, I feel art is a safe space to experiment with things that we can't really experiment with in life. So like you can get a bunch of people in a room and come up with, and so long as you have the resources, like let's say one of the defining resource is you have an enormous wall and a lot of paint, right? Okay. And after that, anything goes. You have five people in the room and you're all throwing away around ideas and you just come up with this idea and you like just paint this wild, wild ass mural. And then everybody just had a great time. Maybe it takes a week. After that, you stay in touch, you send emails, have a pizza party. That's so great, right? But if you're five people in a room and you've got an idea about how to take over the next neighborhood, or any number of dangerous, horrible things. I've seen it where that enthusiasm really does take over, and like you could put anything in motion with enough group enthusiasm, right? And so it just worries me, and I just wish we had more artistic places for people to explore those those exact energies you're talking about, where you just like get in a group and you just get excited about doing something together, and then you do it. Like that is really thrilling thing. I just feel like a lot of times our uh, it, whether it's high level politics or low level crime, I think a lot of bad stuff comes out of
It's
that same
true.
feeling.
It's so true. Use your powers for good and not evil. We're all gonna form a nonviolent cartoonist gang after this episode, okay? Yeah, and I was also thinking about the time between like raving about an idea and executing it and seeing it through. Like politics move really slow, famously, and everyone can say a lot of stuff and get excited about a certain amount of stuff, and then the election cycle repeats. Like it's just this churn, right? It's like promises were made, mistakes were made, etc., so on. So, like, certainly we're fallible, we're human, even if we've been really good about keeping our promises or relinquishing control or keeping control or whatever like good policies you have in place, like you still can't control the power going off in the library, for example. So yeah, so whatever, be a good steward of what you have, like be a good steward of the talent you have, the abilities you have, the intelligence you have. Be okay with like having boundaries and being like, oh yeah, I'm not gonna draw that. I think the only time I've ever refused to draw something, I've probably already mentioned this on the podcast, but I feel like in second grade, like some boys were like, do you know how to draw like sexy looking girls? And I was like, honestly, no. I can totally draw bubble letters though. If you need me to write that, I will happily write your name. Um,
I don't think you mentioned that on the podcast.
no.
I want to mention one other form of collaboration that I've been lucky to be involved with, and that was uh, when I got sort of burned out on large scale stories and graphic novels and things like that, I went back to comic strips, or I went back and realized and remembered my love for comic strips, and I was like, I used to love this form when I was a kid. That's all I read. I was formed by Peanuts pretty much, but I couldn't conceive of making a comic strip. And so I reached out. This was early internet days. I forget exactly when, roughly 2005, I think. And I reached out to Shane Garrity, who was doing this comic called Narbonic. And she was very funny. And also kind of traditional in the way that she just sort of like made jokes. And and luckily she answered my email, and I said, can we collaborate? Can we come up with an idea together? I've got some ideas sort of floating around. And will you just like write me a bunch of jokes and I'll draw them? Or not jokes, because it was a larger storyline, but would you draw me the units, right? 4 panel units. And and she did, and we did that, I think, for about 8 or 9 months. It's a series called Trunktown that we never really published. I need to get it in print someday. But it in essence was me kind of hiring out, like signing up and getting a teacher. I was like, basically, Shane, teach me how to do 4 panel stories. And after that, and so she did. And after that, I did that kind of work on my own for like another 3 years, super happily. Like I was so thrilled. And so that collaboration was one that was like me actually wanting help, me wanting to learn something. And so I was just lucky enough that I don't know, that she was available, whatever. I don't know.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I sort of wonder, like, I mean, you can be someone who makes everything by yourself. Like, there's not really anything wrong with that. But it is interesting. I do think there are these other opportunities, good and bad, that happen when you let other people in on the creative process, and you kind of get to decide when and how to do that. But it is, I feel like when I have an agenda in mind, like, I don't really know how to write, this guy is pretty funny, hey, did you want to read some comics about the hospital? And then I won't have to, and this happens to be topically relevant, and I already know somebody who's looking for comics, so it just makes my life easier. So I love it if you can find someone who's good at what they're doing, and then spend time with them, even if you're not necessarily like doing verbatim what they're doing. Like I think it rubs off. And if I keep hanging out with smart editors and smart writers, maybe people will think I'm really smart. Like guilty by association, you know?
Yeah, we've only got one life, right? And like so many of us feel like we have to prove ourselves in some sort of crucible where they put us in a small room. Actually, you and I know, are both in very small rooms at the moment, but they put you in a small room and look down from up above sternly at you and decide whether or not you have passed, and I just don't think that day's coming, right? What instead we should look for ways to let our creativity and whatever is sourcing that creativity flourish. And who knows what that is, but collaborating certainly could be one of them. And I'm finding I'm still wondering like, oh, am I betraying that like solo auteur thing I was raised like, and will the judgment when the judgment day does come, are they gonna be mad that I've been kind of like noodling around so much and running a school instead of doing solo comics? I don't know, none of that stuff's gonna matter when the real judgment day comes.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like so hard for us to quantify this stuff. And I don't know, like I talked to my friend who has a lot of kids, and she's like, I'm not a real artist. I was like, you're keeping three humans alive. You're still an artist when you're changing diapers. You're just changing diapers. Like, you're like, I'm making this comic school instead of drawing. I'm like, Tom, you're doing the Lord's work. Like, we're here because you decided this should be a thing. So, yeah, there's no end to like feeling guilty about like not just drawing or making comics 24/7 and like tapping into the genius within and honoring it. But yeah, I think there's other ways to like maybe collaborating as a form of productive procrastination or something. I'm like, well, I would have drawn it faster, but I was writing edits, which is a total lie. Like I was not working. I wasn't doing any kind of work, but this also is sort of tangentially related to this idea of like gatekeeping or taste making that we talked about early on in the Terrible Anvil, at least briefly, that I think like cartoonists new to collaborating on a formal level, or maybe like publishing the work or entering a program where we're talking more seriously visually about comics or whatever, like just being around other people and kind of having this level of judgment. Is it good? Is it legible? Can we publish this? Are we going to make any money off of this? There's this introduction, capitalism. We're fine. It's the 40-minute mark. We're on the capitalist tear now. It's like clockwork every time.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so there's this judgment, right? And like who in the collaborative group, if anybody, or even as a solo worker, like who's the one passing judgment on it? And you have a goal, but is there like a watermark of taste as well, where you're like, oh, we can't do that. Like in nonfiction comics, you want to avoid brand names because not every newspaper has a bevy of lawyers to like fight Pepsi or Adidas or whatever. It's like just don't put it in there and then we don't have to worry about it. So just like trying to create less problems for yourself. But in terms of taste, like maybe I've just been lucky. I think there's a lot of gatekeeping in academia, and that's like a subject for a completely different podcast. But when I make comics, I feel like the door has always been open. Like maybe it's just where I arrived or whatever, but like no one's gonna stop you from making comics. The art police are not coming for us. Like it's sort of the opposite. Like people are like, oh, you're a cartoonist. Oh, it's nice to have you here. Like a sort of um you're not like an outcast or something like that. Like I don't know. I feel like there's this reputation that like you don't have power over the thing you're making, or like what you're doing is not good enough. And there are like juried things like or anthologies that you submit to and you don't get your work accepted. So I'm not saying that that doesn't exist. There are like
Sure.
people that are going to reject you, and that is the topic for a forthcoming
Is it? Oh,
episode
good.
of the Terrible Anvil. But I'm just bringing all that up, like because I think sometimes we think maybe I couldn't collaborate on a higher level, or maybe like at a more professional level because I'm just a cartoonist, or I don't know very much, or I'm not really whatever excuse you want to make. I haven't been drawing lately. And I don't know, part of the enthusiasm for the goal or the project with some of the people, particularly at the Boston Globe, like their excitement for what they know the work could be also feels like like a version of faith my abilities that I don't necessarily have every morning when I wake
Mhm.
up. So
Mhm.
being around people that are excited about it, I'm like, yeah, this is really cool. Yeah, it is really cool. Yeah, I will do that. And I'm like, ah, it was not just because I promised it, but also like, oh wow, like I didn't really know that was totally possible. I started talking to other people. It doesn't always have to happen in a like a professional collaboration. It happens a lot in the virtual and real classrooms at SAW, for example. Um, just like, oh yeah, maybe I should do that.
Yeah, I want to mention that. I want to mention two things as in this is the part of the podcast where we talk about Saw a tiny bit, but that Saw as a sort of collaborative space for creating comics that you brought up a little while ago is is really serving a bunch of collaborative purposes. And there are two I want to highlight. One is that one that you just mentioned, which is like um, you can show up and we see you as the person capable of doing the thing that you said you want to do, and you may wake up in the morning and be like, oh, I'm just not that person, but we know you are, and we can help you to get there, and we can help you get there by just being on your side is sometimes enough, by giving you additional tools is enough, um, by by just by being in the same room. So that's super exciting and one form of collaborating that works. But the other related to that, I want to highlight and celebrate Jim Hamilton, who just in the chat said, "I love control, and that's why I self-publish." And I hope that we've contributed to that as well. Like I hope that we've given Jim and anybody else who wants it a chance to thrive in their individual vision, and that's awesome. And that's something that actually makes me feel good. As I'm less, well, I mean, I was going to say, as I'm less and less a solo creator, even though I made 5 albums all by myself in the last year of music, but as I'm less and less a solo comics creator, if I'm helping others be solo comics creator, if that's what they want, then that's awesome too. So anyway, it's just again, it's one reason I've got this Matisse drawing up here. Um, it's just this network, and this is the part of the podcast where I just go on about humanity being beautiful or something, where it's just this like, if we can make a generative sort of matrix or network of humanity, it's just such a good thing. And that's really what I'm trying to do. So collaborating is such a key part of that. So like it's a key ingredient.
So the Matisse painting you put in your virtual background that maybe our audio people can't see right now, it's the famous Matisse painting that was also made into like paper cutouts and woodcuts, all kinds of different types of
And
it's this image of a bunch of people frolicking, which we love, our favorite verb at Saw. They're not wearing any clothes, and there's an excellent butt, at least one butt available. Oh, two butts, frontal and other types of nudity, just nudity all around. Great vibrant colors, and they're like a human chain. They're all holding hands, but they're all like in their own groove too. Like they're striking their own poses, but they're forming a circle. So I'm describing art
yes.
in audio format. It's very strange. I was also thinking two ideas that came up as you were talking, Tom, and I know we probably want to end soon. Um, the first one I kind of thought about earlier. Do you ever collaborate with yourself? And I think you do, because sometimes you'll just stumble across old sketchbooks and you'll be like, oh my God, old Tom had a really cool idea that he just threw away in this awesome sketchbook. Oh my gosh, I'm definitely going to use this. Do you want to talk about that for a second? And I have one more hot topic.
Okay, I would love that because I forgot to mention it, but I think that is such a key important thing because a lot of us, we've got that inner critic and that inner critic works fast. Um, and so we start something and then we end because the inner critic has has said no. But there are ways, the sloppy way is the one you just described in the way that if I'm lucky, I work, which is like I discover something old that I forgot about and then it seems new and so I don't have the judgment on it. But you can also program, give yourself strategies and containers and other things to let yourself collaborate with yourself. And a couple times I've tried it. Like I remember um, doing a comic strip where I did one panel a day and I tried my best to forget it. Like I drew the panel and I forgot it and then went to the
Mm.
next day. And I know lots of people who've done things like that over a longer period of time. I just did it for a couple of weeks or something. But it worked and it really did work because I would you have to have a bad memory like I do. So if you could sit down and be like, what the heck is this? And it's just from yesterday. but it really works, and it was
So
a
were
way
they
to collaborate.
sequential on the page? Like you would draw one and come back to it, and the story would build like a jam comic with yourself?
That's one way I've worked. It's probably these days the way I don't like to work. I'm finding that not being sequential is better for me,
So
and
like
that
working on note cards or something like that if we wanted to try it out.
yeah, but I'm sort of now feeling like I have to do like little finished drawings and then sort of feel like how they might go. And then what happens is you eventually get into a rhythm and you do start to, the storytelling vinyasa class that I offer at SAW is a lot of that. It's like trying to invent a story completely from yourself, but in completely surprising ways. And so what we do is we throw like a lot of lists out, we throw a lot of images out. We combine them in ways that are sequential and non-sequential. And like we're always trying to outpace the sort of inner critic by switching up our procedures. Such a cold word, right? Or switching up our how we go about it. Um, and so that's one way in which we you can self-collaborate, and it's so fun. That's actually one of my favorite things to do.
That's awesome. And there was also, you mentioned the joys of collaborating, and then you're like, but I've been making music in my basement by myself for several albums now. And so you're kind of flagging yourself as a soloist, depending on the medium and the year and the, whatever you're into. And and Jim also said, man, I love making my own thing and publishing it how I want to. And I think there's a lot of value in that creative control where you have the guts to be accountable to yourself and deliver the work and the way it's going to come out, and then like see it all the way to some level of production that you can share it with other people, which is really, really cool.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I wonder if I I don't know if it's always that like being a soloist goes with I don't know if this is a clear analogy. It might not work, but I was trying to think if there were any other crossovers between music and art making. And very briefly, I played banjo. I would love. I keep threatening to buy one. This
Uh-oh,
might be
did we
my
lose
year to
Jess again?
get
What do you
another
think she was going to say?
one.
She might
Oh,
have to
what
call. Um, oh no, she's frozen.
what
Well, gang,
happened? Oh
we don't know
no!
what Jess was going to say. I think the go-to phrase was it me this time?
I don't know. Was it you? Was it me? Can anyone hear me?
Wait, what happened? Oh my gosh, this is such a crazy
I could
thing.
hear Tom the whole time. Oh my gosh.
Oh,
We're
you
Can anyone hear me?
all
Okay, good.
right.
Jim's like,
All right. Well, anyway,
isn't that funny? We're like, let's tell you how to live your life. And they're like, the universe is like, you don't need to hear any of this. It's not important.
no idea if what's going to happen with this, if we're going to edit this in or out or whatever. You were talking about music and I didn't hear you, and maybe that's our
Yeah,
sign
yeah,
from
yeah, yeah. I
head
don't know if this is
out.
gonna work. I was trying to think if you can hear me. Solo music, yeah. Like Tom has said that, or I hate speaking about you in the third person, but paraphrasing, Tom, you have said that you're making music and you're newer to music than making art, and so your limitations in order to get the work done is different, maybe than like the level of art making you're making. I'm being really fast and loose with all this. So I was wondering, I'm like, is it more enticing as a beginner in a medium to work as a soloist and then collaborate with people, or like when do you invite people in? Or I was thinking, I was like, well, that's not always true because when I first started playing banjo, we would get in a group with a bunch of other brand new beginners and just start wailing on the same three strings. And we'd be like, damn, we sound really good. And we would totally be delusional about our abilities because, like, you don't sound as bad if everyone sounds bad. It kind of sounds beautiful. So it's like singing at church. So I was just wondering, like, solo versus like what's the connection of being a beginner in a medium with being a soloist or deciding to work with a group, if any? And I don't know if it's relevant or
I don't.
any other related thoughts.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a important separation to make. Like they're all good, right?
Yeah.
I'm learning music on my own. largely, you mentioned let's go into therapy land. You mentioned like ceding control and giving up too much control and maybe to your detriment, right? And I think I do the same thing. I There's not a lot of places I have frankly privacy or let's just call it that, privacy about right now. So lately making music's been this like private thing I can do, and I can let it be as just um, small or uh, soft or weird or amateur or anything that it wants to be, and I can just explore it and look at it and and try and understand it. It's just this little part of the world that it's like a little, a little tiny patch of land I'm growing, a little garden I'm growing, very, very tiny, but I don't have any other land access to, at the moment because I've given up comics because I sort of don't know what I'm doing anymore. So, but what you just described, is as a way of getting into a medium, which is like a bunch of people in a room, maybe some amateurs, maybe some not, and that is what um, a lot of folk music and a lot of folk singing can be, is like the generations come together and the generations of a level of proficiency and things like that. And again, you have a shared goal, and that shared goal is make the universe ring with this sound, and
Yeah.
this song. And that's a great thing too. It's all great. We're
I'm
here.
glad you brought up generations too, because like I don't know, like sometimes it can feel like very homogenous that like tastemakers might be all the young people that know how to use Instagram. I just feel really old. I'm like, oh, but and I don't know, but I did have a old time musician friend joke. He's like, I was like, how was the tour? I think he had gone out on tour. He's like, all of our fans are getting really old and disappearing. He's like, we need to like tap into the younger audiences because people are just like straight up, receiving their mortality. So yeah, like I like the idea of collaboration across time too. Like that's kind of woo-woo, but you go to a museum and you're like, oh my gosh, this Matisse painting rocks so hard. I want to build a human chain of love like these nudists here by Tom. Or for better or worse, like you're collaborating with systemic government problems from the 1960s every time you go to the
Huh.
DMV. Like whether you want it or not, like you're collaborating with the world as it is, like across time for the people that were before you and maybe the people that are after you. So it I hopefully that takes the weight off your shoulders if you're like, I gotta get it all right. I only have one shot.
Right.
Um, like maybe, but also like there are opportunities to like keep the game of telephone going.
Right. 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 Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. That's it's a great place to sign off, right?
We
I don't
should before the Wi-Fi dies again.
right. Yeah, I mean, we're given this opportunity, and collaborate with the circumstances we're given is all we can really do. Although, again, I mean, I'll say that like that little bit of privacy that I have for my, my whatever world, I think we all are entitled to something like that. But we're also probably at our best if we collaborate in some way.
And maybe even like you make the work in solitude mostly, but you still share it on the internet and like I can go listen to your music. It's even part of our intro in the Terrible Anvil. So um sometimes the collaboration is uh post production
Of
where
course.
people give you their unsolicited opinion. It's not necessarily collaborative in the same spirit, but you're like, oh, I hear you, or that's interesting, or oh, I thought of this musician you might really like, or this play you might really like because you're making music about XYZ. So it can lead to other things. It's definitely a conversation keeper, like it keeps it going, which is kind of like a collaboration.
Cool. So it's okay to cede control, have a shared vision do we have takeaways, or are we just going to move on to the next episode?
That sounds great.
Fights
I
with editors. I wrote that down. Pick fights with editors.
pick fights with editors, really? That's something I said.
You said you said you used to do that in your
I
you
don't recommend it if like people won't want to work with you if you're a troll. But
what's our next episode, Jess?
I'm trying to find it now, which I was like, oh, do we have any more spicy takeaways? I let's see, I've got a list here. Yeah, if I have a takeaway, it's that like you have more power. Agency was a word I was thinking of. You have a lot of agency as a comic creator, and you have inherent knowledge just by being a human in the world, and that's what you're bringing to the table. So collaborate whenever the hell you want, if you so choose. Next episode, we're talking about, is this right? How to deal with criticism, rejection, and deadlines.
Oh,
And my note to self is don't reject yourself before the world rejects you by not delivering the work. It sound like I'm yelling at myself.
that's right. Yeah, let the world reject you. Don't you do it.
So yeah, so like kind of dealing with rejection is like the other side of the coin. We've been talking about how great collaborating is, and you're like, oh, I just got in a fight with this editor. Like maybe we'll have stories like that. I don't know.
Yeah, rejection is really, really, it's a bummer. So let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds
Thanks,
good.
Jess. Thanks to all of our attendees for being here. Thanks to you in the future or past if you're listening. Jess,
Our
thanks.
listeners are collaborators. It's so
What?
cool. I feel like our listeners are our collaborators, whether you're in the past, present, or future.
We appreciate it. And Jess will do a post cap. What do you call it? A recap. Sorry,
I think,
recap.
is that what a recap is?
So you'll do a recap and you'll post that in our public feed and we'll all remember what we talked about. All right.
Yes. It's like an accountability chain. So good.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for joining us. This has been a production of the Sequential Artists Workshop, or SAW. You can find us on social media at Comics Workshop and online at sawcomics.org. You can hear about our many courses at learn.sawcomics.org. SAW is a nonprofit and supported by people like you. Learn how to make a tax-deductible donation at the donate page of sawcomics.org. You can join our free community of comics explorers at members.sawcomics.org. Thanks so much for being here.